Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Explore, Explain. This is a special episode. We've got an array of talent, some absolute heroes from the world of data viz joining us today. It's a special episode. We're going to try and tackle a subject in a different way today rather than one project and dissect all the thinking behind it. But today we've got Michael Brenner, we've got Sarah Slobin, we've got Jon Schwabish, who are absolutely welcome to the episode. And thank you again for giving up your time for today. Hopefully we'll keep everyone on in line with the conversation. We won't meander too far off because I know that we are all very much capable of doing so. But let's start off with some introductions so that the viewers and listeners can grasp who each of you are. Michael, who are you? Where are you? What do you do? And then we'll move through Sarah and to Jon.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Brenner. I'm currently in Milan, Italy, where I'm also located and based. I'm a graphic designer by education, but I'm currently the head of creative at Data for Change, a small nonprofit that helps other organizations create data-driven projects and campaigns in a nutshell.
Super. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Andy, for allowing all of us in the room at the same time. I am Sarah Slobin. I am a journalist who has been working with data for actually a few decades now, many decades. I work for Reuters as a visual editor and have essentially sort of toured all of the major New York news organizations over the course of my career. And I also teach. I'm in New York City. I am in Harlem. Jon?
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I'm Jon Schwabish. I am a senior fellow at the Urban Institute, a nonprofit research institution based in Washington, D.C. I live in Northern Virginia, just outside D.C. I'm also owner of PolicyViz website and firm, and I am actually trained as an economist, but got into the data viz game largely thanks to Andy, actually, which we can talk about later. I've been doing this for a little over a decade now, and yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, and you know, we've kind of handpicked this group of people for this topic, but I think what that also reflects is that we are of a certain vintage in this field. We've done several laps of this field.
There's more gray in this call.
There is, yeah, and we can adjust that post-production. But
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, but you know, what we're going to look at today is a broad issue of data viz technology. And I think it does help that we've got a little bit of distance in our rear mirror to look at how that's evolved over time. Contrast where we are now with where we first entered this field and what tools were there when, for example, in my early days, Wordle was a very different thing to what it is now. But also it reflects also the fact that we haven't got maybe new starters on this call. So we're going to try and occupy the mindset of if we were both starting out today, what technology options would we look to embrace? As experienced professionals, what other tools could we add to our repertoire to fine-tune and finesse those little edge case moments where we need to just squeeze out some more functionality, more capability? But also, I want to get a sense of perhaps what's missing. And maybe if there are any vendors or tool makers out there watching, what can we do to express almost a wish list of things that if we could just have these features, whether very small, minutiae matters or grander matters, that's perhaps an appeal for those people out there listening as well. But so again, today's episode is going to be perhaps a little bit less structured than normal conversations because there is such a wide spectrum of branches that we can tackle this subject from. But I think the first thing I want to start off, let's go back to our origin story. Michael, first up, what was the first tool you used to ever create a data viz? Now, you've mentioned already that you are, by teaching, a graphic designer, so maybe you were making these things without even being conscious that you were sort of doing data viz. But
Yeah.
what do you think is perhaps the first tool that you picked up? And not pen and paper for this.
No. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Again, I started back in the early 2000s. So what currently is out there didn't exist, and it was actually Illustrator. A lot of it was just hand done in Illustrator.
Right.
And at the time, there was this really beautiful JavaScript plugin called Scriptographer, where you could actually create little apps within Illustrator to plot some data. A lot of what is Apple scripting now in Illustrator, or using, a more advanced plotting program. But a lot of it, to be honest, was just trying to see what worked in the space that you had. And when you got to the end, you're like, oh no, there's not enough space for this data or that data. Delete four weeks worth of work and start over again. So yeah, it was definitely very manual. It felt very much like setting type as a typesetter with lead blocks, and just trying to figure out what fit where and how it fit together. But yeah, it was definitely Illustrator was the very first program that I had used to give some shape and form to data.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, there was even times where, this is going to really date me, but like MS Paint.
Yeah.
There was, so I mean, not for things that you were actually publishing, but even for like as a sketching tool for something.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Would it be similar for yourself, Sarah? What was your entry tool into this world?
Yeah, same. When I started at the Times, the New York Times, and we were using Illustrator, and I didn't know Illustrator, and I had to be taught, and my colleague who had to teach me was super annoyed that I had joined the graphics desk, which Charles Below had brought me into, and he was really could not believe that I didn't understand how to use the tool. And it's my favorite
design tool. It wasn't meant for that.
Well, we were, the only thing we used was the charting engine, which if we're going to complain about something not changing, like the charting engine in Illustrator has really become obsolete. They haven't upgraded it ever, really. So
now, just in that context again, Sarah. I'm just thinking about how your world has changed in graphic journalism, visual journalism. Back in those days, is it fair to say that you were perhaps the end of line appearance prettifiers of people's sketches on envelopes? Can you just make this production ready? Or were you involved in doing data journalism earlier on through the kind of the cycle?
Wow. That just still makes my blood boil. The concept of prettifying something, Andy, you're really lucky we're at a distance here.
I'm simply reflecting what I know that others have experienced.
So the breakthrough at the New York Times was that we were not a service bureau.
Yeah.
And we were reporting from the ground. We sent Archie Say back in the day, went to cover, was in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was captured. He was literally pacing the ground and sending back images, which Charles Blow was then drawing, and I was sitting somewhere in the middle. We were on the ground during 9/11, where we created maps that were used by FEMA. Bill McNulty made these amazing maps back in the day. So we were a desk, as in a reporting desk. And because you can, when a reporter says, well, it's on the border, it's on the south, you can't map that, right? So
Right.
what you need when you're creating a visualization is you need a data point, and you're collecting a different set of information. You know, we were on the ground for you know, the first school shooting, where we were calling around to pizza places to send the diagrams. You know, I was using MapQuest to plot where things were, you know, for in context of Columbine, and we had sent Tom Zeller down there to actually do the reporting. So as in journalism, and this is just how I was trained, and this is how I continue to work, is we were not prettifiers, and we were not someone who was there to break, quote unquote, break up the gray, because you need, I need something to go with this, and there's no way to get pictures. We were literally collecting data, verifying the information, visualizing the information, you know, sketching it, drawing it, creating it, and building the narrative.
But it's also probably fair to say that the role of something like AI, for example, Adobe Illustrator, let's clarify that abbreviation, was useful because I guess a lot of the work that you're doing was kind of bespoke and relatively one-off rather than being easily reproducible, updatable. It's not production stuff like you know, election
100%.
forecast going in. So that bespokeness that Illustrator offers was a good fit in many respects.
Yeah.
I'm going to come to you, John, though, because I'm gonna guess your answer, but tell me if I'm wrong. You know, Economist, that feels like Excel.
Yes. Yes, definitely Excel. I was actually trying to find this paper, the first paper I ever wrote, and I'm looking at it right now. This was 2000 maybe. It's definitely Excel graphs with all the blocks on every point. But the analysis was mostly done in tools like SAS, Stata. Later on, it was Stata. My first real job in DC was Fortran, which is a base language that most people who are listening to this have no idea what that is. And now it's mostly, I don't know, certainly growing more quickly is R, for sure. With a good chunk of Python to clarify, I do not code in Python. But in the field, it's a lot of I would say in a lot of the quantitative social sciences, it's Stata, R, a good chunk of Python, and then there's a smattering of other tools depending on sort of like where you are.
Right.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely like do all the data analysis, cleaning, coding, all in SAS or Stata. Both of those tools have I mean, at the time they had very, very base graphic libraries. I mean, you could do almost, I mean, SAS, you could do almost nothing. Stata a little bit more. But yeah, you just pipe all that stuff out into Excel and then you make your graphs in Excel.
Yeah, and I mean, likewise for myself, Excel would have been the first, probably the first, maybe even before that, Lotus 1, 2, 3.
I was gonna say Lotus 1,
Thinking
2,
about
3.
it.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah,
for a little bit. Yeah.
Again, we are revealing our age here, but I mean, it also kind of shows. I think just looking at Excel alone, I mean, I am a Mac user. I don't know if Excel on Windows is any more advanced, but certainly to me, it doesn't feel like Excel has moved hugely beyond Excel 97's iteration. That's not to say, before we get into this, that I criticize Excel. I think Excel is possibly one of the greatest tools I've ever invented. I mean, its use and its value to so many reasons has been exceptional. But from a charting point of view, I don't feel that there's been a huge amount of kind of move on from there. Maybe that's unfair in some respects. Certainly the defaults are still stuck in 97.
I would say that it's advanced more. So I guess I would say two things. I would say one, that the charting library in Excel has advanced more quickly over the last decade than it had in the previous, maybe decade's too long. In the last 5-7 years, half dozen years, it's improved much more quickly than in the previous 20 years. And I'd also say that while the core of it is the core piece that you see when you open your Excel instance is kind of unchanged. underneath has undergone a lot of changes, right? Because they are moving to a Python base as well. But to Sarah's point, like the comparison of Illustrator's graphic library to Excel's graphic library, I think like the Illustrator graphic library hasn't changed at all. Where at least Excel, like they have improved how you create things. I think they've improved the interface greatly. They've added some other things, but the Adobe thing is just like, unless you use some of those third-party add-ins, like, but the core Illustrator graphics tool is what it was when it started.
But I think with that, then there's a broader question here about why do we use the tools? Why do we need tools? And I think there's been a couple of points raised there about different aspects of this, which is on one hand, and this perhaps captures the entire tension of the data viz technology space, which is on one hand, Michael and Sarah's context of a desire to almost hand craft and create bespoke digital but almost hand-drawn solutions that can respond to whatever it is you want to create, wherever you want it to be, however you want it to look, versus Excel, which in a large part is about production. It's about reproducibility. It's about efficiency. It's about scale. It's about having this linked to a tremendous amount of possibly complicated, technical, sophisticated calculations. And so whenever we're thinking about a tool, it's there to do several things. It's to be quicker, it's to be more efficient, it's to be more accurate, more precise, more consistent and reproducible. And I guess it's through that lens that we judge whether we feel that we are served by the tools that we need to do our craft. Now, that's a very broad question, but maybe I'll come to you, Michael, to kick off with. In a perhaps a summary answer, do you feel that you have the tools that you need and the features with those tools to do your craft as a data viz person?
I think there's a couple of factors here that should be addressed too, and I think it's who ultimately are we communicating to, and what would resonate with them. I think that the tools that we have for, let's say, giving shape to data and being able to explore data to understand what it is that it's telling us is there. I think that there's a whole set, like when we're talking about humanizing data and creating data that can communicate to people to reach people on another level, beyond just, okay, I'm going to consume some statistics and then I'm going to, that's it. That's the kind of, I deliver to numbers. I think we have the tools for that. I don't think that we currently have the tools or even yet the visual language. And when I say visual language, I don't mean beautifying or like cake decorating.
Yeah.
I don't think that we yet have the ways of communicating data beyond visualizing it, and that includes also sonification, physicalization, to really connect with people, to be able to inspire them into action. Now, that's coming from my very specific background of working with human related data and translating those human experiences into, it's like we gather information, we abstract that information, and then we kind of deliver it in this abstract way. When I say we, I don't mean me personally, but as the royal we, right? And then we kind of leave it at that. And it's like, well, if we were to design a kid's book and deliver some information, we create these beautiful images to kind of further underscore and that connect conceptually to the content that the story is about, right? So data as a content type has lots of underlying things that we can tap into to potentially explore and to be able to use those, let's say, contextual clues to then create this new type of visual language to be able to realize data and communicate it in different ways. So I don't think yet that we have those particular tools. I think things like AI are great ways of sketching and exploring those things. And I think things like, whether it be Data Wrapper or Flourish, or even we use Google Sheets a lot, even using just Google Sheets to understand, well, what's the shape and the form of the data, and then take that a step further. So some of the very early pieces that we were doing, maybe you were at the Times then, Sarah, But when I was working at a design studio in Brooklyn called Management, we had done a bunch of pieces for the New York Times about the Iraq and Afghanistan war, and they were these big broadside pieces. So with Alicia Chang and Sarah Gephardt and myself, they were leading, and I was just moving stuff around after they had set up the system. But it was this Neurath, one-to-one representation, and we did, I think, about 3-4 years worth of these big, massive Sunday op-ed pieces.
I remember those. Yeah.
Yeah, and those were all had more of a human quality and touch at the time, because it had one symbol is one person, and you had this connection. And so I think within creating these types of more bespoke pieces, there's the ability to make these deeper connections within the story frame and the way that we're communicating. But I don't think that we necessarily yet at a commercial level have tools that are, other than, unless you're going into coding and doing something very bespoke, at a commercial level, have that ability to customize. Just trying to think off the top of my head, of what might, maybe infogram, but that comes with a very particular stylistic output that maybe doesn't allow for certain types of levels of sophistication.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Like when we talk about design, we often talk about what people communicate with, or connect with, and changing a typeface and a color doesn't always do that. We need to go further also in our visual explorations. And also we have, now I'm going off on a deep tangent and I'll stop after this. We also have 5 senses, right? But how can we connect and start to bring in things beyond, sight, whether it's sight and physicalization, if it's sight, sound, and physicalization, we start providing new roads and different perspectives into that data. One thing that actually I would love to get my hands on, and with a lot of weather reporting, there's this immersive AR reality where actually, as you're talking about storm surge and flooding,
like the flood simulations.
Exactly. Because then you can start to, it changes the relationship of the person who's consuming that data, and that is a data visualization. Their relationship with the data, and you start to understand what those numbers actually mean in real time. And that's in that very specific example. But if we can potentially start to abstract some of these core concepts and figure out how we can then put them into tools, or create tools that can help us sketch a little bit differently, or realize some of these quote unquote more far-fetched ideas in a quick and more timely manner, then I think they'll become more common ground for better ways of communicating data.
Yeah, and I think there's loads of great points there, and I think I'll just bridge to Sarah to maybe pick up on a couple. I think first of all, there's perhaps a distinction that Michael's expressed there between tools for making and producing and tools for experiencing, and the platform in which you encounter these things. Just as a side issue there, I always remember a piece someone did, and I won't name them, it's not a criticism about them at all, but it was a piece to show massiveness of a number. And I think it was about the number of sharks killed for their fins for different food reasons. But it was like a one-to-one isotype type treatment. But as you scroll down the page, the only way that you got a sense of these numbers growing was the scroll bar, because the thing on screen wasn't actually changing. You were moving through, but you weren't seeing change. There wasn't a different texture. Now, if that was printed, it would be really impactful. But because we were looking at it through this little letterbox of a screen, it didn't have remotely the same impression. So that was one of the first times I thought, well, there's such an impact in the output format for experiencing different things. So that's one point. And I know that in your career, Sarah, you've gone through this iteration of print first to digital and then to mobile, and how that brings different challenges. But then the second point, which is a question, I think, of the motivation of vendors and tool makers, which is, are they there to stretch the boundaries of practice and to push us into new directions, or are they reflective of what we're after? And again, like anecdote to go with that, I always remember the big kickoff. You might have seen this, John, maybe about a decade ago. I think it was around the time that Tableau went public. Sorry, Tableau was on the stock market. Was it an IPO? I can't remember what it went. And in that version of Tableau, they brought in a bubble chart. And I remember a piece from Stephen Few at the time kicking off about bubble charts, bubbles, judging of areas imprecise. And he was kind of raising the question that now they are very much more commercial organization. Were they reacting to the demands of their customers saying, we want to make bubble charts? And even if it wasn't, quote unquote, best practice, they were sort of bending towards what people were asking for them rather than saying, here's what data viz practice should be. So a long way to raise a couple of points there, sir. But just let me pass on to you to pick up the conversation. What are your thoughts on what Michael expressed as well?
Well, I mean, I think Michael is it's a forward-looking thought, right? And every time there is a bit of a breakthrough, like for instance, the waves, we all have seen now the waves rising up to give you a sense of scale and flooding. It moves us forward incrementally. Just looking backwards, we are not, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. We know that data visualization, you look at Fortune magazine and the way that they were showing things, and what they had was a gatefold, right? When you get to this idea of, when we move to the idea of scrolling, what I would say is that person wasn't using scrolling very well, because there is a way to use that particular interaction pattern so that you do get a sense of depth and how long things are and how big things are, which leads me back to, there's really 2 points. One is the idea that and this is something I mentioned in our previous conversations, is that every tool we have is held hostage to the company that is making it, and is a product of the idiosyncratic brain that created it, and is being driven toward an audience and what whoever is building it thinks their needs are. And sometimes there's a person over the top of it who doesn't understand exactly what they think their needs are, but they think it might sell.
Right.
So it's been an interesting, and then again, with these tools, there are the front end. How do you manage the data? How do you scrape the data? How do you collect the data? And we have gotten to, we are deeply into the eras past the original era of big data, which has required a whole other set of tools. So the ability to use Python, Amanda Cox, when she came into the Times, changed what we did, because she was the first person who brought R and was able to analyze data in a bigger sense. I watched the rise of D3 with Michael Bostock, and that is a very idiosyncratic library, which very much reflects his genius brain, but was also promoted and out there because of it was being used by the New York Times, which at the moment was one of the few data viz shops that was actually creating everything. Simultaneously, Raphael was sort of on the platform, but nobody hired those guys. Had those guys been hired and promoted, just like when you look at Tableau, which I think is sort of like having a casino when you need to go to a mom and pop shop. Tableau became.
Hold on, let's pause on that just for a moment, because
what?
That line is, and let's cut that line. That line is like just.
That's the clip.
Yeah, that's the clip.
That's the clip.
That's the intro clip.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just keep going.
Yeah.
Essentially, what Tableau did was they created an army of promotional. Remember when Tableau was, what was it called? You were a Tableau, not a ninja. What was the term that they were using? Zen Master, right? So they were Tableau Zen Masters, which they then stopped using,
Yep.
But, because you were able to pair this new tool and then promote it with social media and then get people to work for free for you and do these, like, I'm going to redo this, really, I'm going to do my makeover Monday, and look, I'm using Tableau. And so that then becomes a tool to be used for folks who need to work in a PC space. You have a similar thing happens with Power BI. You have, these sets of tools that people use because they plug into their needs for a corporate audience.
So there's
So,
there's a market thing at play here in terms of
100%.
not so much survival of the fittest, but certainly who gets attached to, for example, the halo effect of being attached to the New York Times. How do they do what they do? Oh, we use D3. Right, I'll learn D3 because I want to emulate what those people do. Tableau, as you said, it gets this huge community working on the Tableau public tool,
Right.
which is simultaneously giving them a tool to play with and to practice, but it's seeding in them a capability that they then knock on the door at the workplace. We want this tool that I'm good at now, and that we can recreate these things. And it's, as you said, it's free publicity. I mean, but that's not so much an accusation of it being a cynical thing. It's just a thing. But then likewise, the community of people around R sharing scripts and solutions is vast. It's not one that I've ever dabbled in, but I can see from the outside that you've got a lot of friends around that world if you want to get into that. But again, it comes in waves and volume of practitioners and showcasing this stuff. And I think just bridging to yourself then, Jon, and feel free to pick up on any of those points that Michael and Sarah have raised. But I think the other thing that occurs to me about this, and it's similar to the Tableau bubble chart thing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I still think, for example, you can make 3D charts in Excel. And I know that when you see people talk about Excel, that there's, a certain fume emerges in their face and their color of the face saying, how dare you still have this capability? It's bad practice. But again, we've done a few laps of this field. What ones we might have seen as, yeah, I agree, it's bad practice. And then you realize, well, actually, there are occasions where that's actually that's fine. I'm thinking, Reuters. I always think back to the work that Simon Scar did to visualize. I think he was working with Marco at the time, Marco Hernandez, to visualize the amount of plastics.
Yep.
3D. I mean, it wasn't made in Excel, but the concept of a 3D thing that you can't measure how big it is next to the Eiffel Tower, but it's not the point. It's vast. So I think the point I'm getting at, Jon, is to what extent should a tool offer guardrails within some notion of what is possibly better or worse practice, better practice promoting, worse practice, less so. Should the tool give the user of that tool that sense of a guardrail, or should it just be you can do anything you want, like the kind of casino mom and pop style? Should we just be given access to whatever we need, and it's up to us to learn the craft of how to use that well?
Yeah. Boy, I don't know. I don't know if I really know how to answer that, but I have a couple of stories that might help. In a couple of different tools. So one, in ggplot, which is the main graphics library in R, which was built by Hadley Wickham, you cannot build by default in that package. You cannot build a dual axis chart. Hadley does not build, or did. I don't know if he has changed. He did not at the time.
For listeners,
did not
Sarah's
believe in dual
currently
axis charts. So you can't make it. So that's Hadley's. Look, any tool that's built, it's still built with a human behind it, right?
That's Sarah's point about idiosyncrasies. Yeah.
Right. The other point I'd make is this is definitely supply and demand, right? Like all this is sort of working in various ways. I'm drawing the supply demand curves with my hands, right? And here's I am. So I still do economics once in a while. So here I think is the maybe the perfect example. So I've become a big fan of Flourish over the last few months. I think it's a really nice tool. It allows you to do some things. in the interactive world that isn't the circus. I think that Sarah's sort of alluding to, right? Like if you want to build a map where someone could just simply toggle between 5 different metrics, you can do that in Flourish really easily, really quickly. So I like it, but also has some weirdnesses in there that I don't like. But here's the point that I have made. So with that caveat that I really like it, here's the point that I've made to the folks over at Flourish time and time again, that you should be able to, within the tool, within a very simple click of a button or toggle the thing, if you have 3 graphs, they should be linked together. So instead of having 3 different filters for the same data, right? Because I think 99.99% of dashboards that are actually used to make decisions are bar chart, line chart, map, and that's it, right? All the stuff you see on Tableau Public or Power BI Viz of the Day is like, it's the
exception,
case, right?
Yeah.
Whenever I tell Flourish, you have, because you can do it. It is possible to do it in the tool. Whenever I make this point to them, their response is, we are a data storytelling firm. We are not a dashboarding firm. Now, I don't know what data storytelling firm means, so that's a side point. But they have, to Sarah's point, they have made a conscious organizational firm level decision that they are going to focus on the storytelling, on the scrollytelling thing, and dashboarding is not what they are going to work on. I'm not a software developer, so I don't know how much time it takes to build that sort of capability. But I think if that sort of capability immediately lets you compete with a tool like Tableau and Power BI for better, for worse. But I want to say one other thing, Andy, because you started this whole round with sort of some of the advantages and disadvantages of Excel. And I'm going to channel my colleague Aaron Williams here, who sort of really built the R capabilities at Urban. And Aaron and I go back and forth on the utility of Excel, right? As I'm sure everybody knows, I love Excel. I'm a big Excel user, but I would not argue that Excel is particularly reproducible or scalable, right?
Agreed,
I would argue that a tool like R, even a tool like any coding language, is more reproducible and scalable, right? If I make I won't even say bespoke graph, but some graph that is not insert graph in that Excel drop-down menu. If I make something, any additional step, I have to walk you through how to do that, right? But I could share with you the data and my R script, and you could run it and make the graph right away. So that's reproducible and that's scalable. And so Excel, just like any of these others, my whole belief has always been that these are all just tools, and we just use what works best, and works best for us and works best for the places in which we work. I mean, Data for Change that Mike works at, right? Like, you guys are doing a lot of stuff in like small groups in Africa and in other countries where, and this is going to apply really to any place in the world, right? Budgets are limited, personnel is limited, broadband access is limited. Like, I think that's the thing that we forget. Like,
not everyone has
thing. Not everybody, like, right?
But that sucks up so much data, and it's so heavy to load. And if you need access to that information, when we talk about access, that should also be part of the conversation about access.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think accessibility. That's
another talk show.
Thing. But like, I would just say, like, the data viz field is obsessed with red, green.
Right. It's not just about web accessibility either. Accessibility as a holistic thought and approach and environment needs to also include bandwidths and also versions of browsers, because there's a large swath of the global population who doesn't have the latest technology, and not everything renders. And so when we're creating these bespoke things or these bigger things, we need to take into account a lot of the limitations. Use those limitations not as, oh my goodness, I have to do this thing, but use them as inspiration. Be inspired by constraints to then hack the box to be able to get around the thing to do the thing that you want to do.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think, to your point, reproducible and scalable is important, and accessible is important when we think about audience and we think about people who are making things, and how can they make things or not. Reproducible and scalable is super problematic if you don't have an idea behind what you're doing and a story behind what you're doing. And the thing that I'm going to tell a story about I was working on a project, and it was about a young woman who had become addicted to meth, and her parents had done a Freedom of Information request and gotten her prescription filling, from the where she was getting her prescriptions, and so she was pharmacy shopping. So I built this project at the time. Gosh, and I can't even remember what the program was that I used, because I'll come back to you on that.
Yeah.
But I built this project, and it started off with visually showing her face when she was young and happy, and then contrasting that with what people say are the faces of meth or later on, and this was all built through understanding what she was doing, what she was going through. And I had people sort of look at the project as I was building it, and what I saw, the first was somebody sort of leaning in and laughing and going, "Oh, look at how sweet she is," and then stepping back when they saw that change. So this is to say that one of the things that I try to do in my work always is bring an element of surprise or bring something unexpected, so that when you look at my work, you sort of go, "Huh, what is that? That's cool." And then you understand it. And then you're drawn into the project. This is Michael's idea of sort of breaking the box, because one thing I never want to do is repeat myself. I cannot, I'm bored to hell if I'm just doing the same thing, bar charts, pie charts, over and over. So that is to say that, for people who are asking what is the tool that I should be using, again, it starts with your own idiosyncratic brain. So if you start with your idiosyncratic brain and you say, I relate better to R, I relate better to Python, I relate better to Excel, I'm interested in Tableau, I like Power BI, I like Flourish, I like Illustrator, whatever, I like, not I like to do this thing because it's become fetishized among the data viz community. I think we saw that with like sort of the rise of programmers, and you have to be able to code to do these things. And then we went from having to build the tools to Flourish and other, data wrapper. So my point is that when you're using a tool, you use what makes sense to you and you get better at it. You need to have a story. And this is what a data storytelling team is, Jon. You need to have, from my point of view, you need to have a story, or you need to have visual that draws the reader in. And because of that, sometimes you have to go beyond what the tool offers you.
Yeah.
I see too many. I understand people are learning and they're trying to learn, but in terms of repeatable and scalable, I see derivative.
Mm.
Yes. And
I don't disagree with that, but I think it's also, you mentioned it, the individual. So it's so we could build up. It's the individual, your skill, your inclination, your preferences. Then it's the organization.
Precisely.
Right? Like I'm not, but I might, be a great D3 programmer. But, if your company or your firm is building PDF reports, like D3 is probably not going to get to where you need to go. And then, I don't know if I've gone up or down here, but then it's the world in which you live, right? So for example, in the research world, reproducibility and scalability is really important when you're talking about the scientific method and being able to have things peer reviewed and checked, right? In the journalism world, as you just noted, like that part may not be as important, right? When you tell the story of the once in a 50-year comet coming across, like it probably doesn't really matter to make that reproducible, because the next time you build it in another 50 years, everything has changed, right? In the social sciences and other sciences, like maybe, but when I submit a paper to the journal of blah blah blah, right? The part of the process is that the peer reviewer should be able to. They don't, which is a totally different discussion. but they should be able to reproduce that analysis, right? So that's where, in my world of the research world, the reproducibility, scalability is important, but I totally acknowledge not important everywhere else for every other firm.
You jump in, Michael.
Yes. So coming back to scalability and sorry, what was the second? Scalability and reproducibility. I think actually for us, that's something that's really big because, and this is where I think it becomes possible when you start bringing systems thinking into this framework, because you've got, this is a bastardized term now, but design thinking or thinking like a designer, and then you bring in systems thinking, and then you bring in data as a content into these environments, and you can allow, so for example, Jon's 50-year comet story, actually there's some key things that would relate to other data types that we could extract from that, build something that's more white label or tofu, meaning that it, we could pump other types of data into that and within a context change the framework, and it would work perfect. And again, this is hacking the box where we've got a limited set of resources and we've got a lot of constraints, but we can take some of those core concepts from whatever it might be and apply them to different contexts. Because those again, data is just a content type, and it reacts to things once you start putting variables against it, and it starts to take form, right? You could take one data set, you could visualize it in 50 different charts. Each chart's going to give you a different perspective. Each chart will tell you something different about that data. And maybe, and again, coming back to audience, what the point that you're trying to get across, you could use all 50 of those charts in a multitude of different delivered versions that may be better for, again, what I'm actually talking about is Urban's double pyramid. Who's your audience, and what's your context, and how much information are you delivering? I know I use it all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think that you can achieve, scalability and reproducibility, but you have to have that at the beginning. It can't be an afterthought, because like back in our early days, we all started off talking about how we were using Illustrator, right? We were creating bespoke integrated things. They fit one purpose because we needed to get that thing out there and done. With the advent of, things like shorthand, or even Flourish's scrolly telling feature, or, aspects of data wrapper and being able to embed things where we can build up these libraries of visualizations, we can give a better insight into a specific type of data. So I think it is possible, but you just have to think about that in the beginning. And one of the observations that I've noticed from everything that we're talking about are all the tools are for visualizing data, right? And we're always talking about storytelling and communicating data in different ways. And so what would be really interesting is to collectively, and this is a call to, not a call to arms, but a challenge to the community, is to start thinking about ways in which we can build have a tool or a series of tools or a stack of tools that take into account the entire pipeline from I have an idea for some data that I would like to collect or I would like to find, all the way to I would like to communicate this data and what that looks like in between. Not necessarily a checklist, but something that you could go through that would be those guardrails to be able to say, okay, I've done my quote unquote due diligence in this aspect, I can move on to the next. Because
which you think, and sorry to just jump on there, Michael. So I'm thinking back to our original very starting point of this episode, exchange of messages, which was motivated by me mentioning publicly that I was moving on from Illustrator to get the Affinity Suite.
Yes.
And I think about a week later, Canva bought Affinity, brought it under their family, which sits alongside Flourish. And it's interesting to see where that goes next, because obviously these are standalone tools in and of themselves, but could that lead towards something where you've got in this tool stack an ideation step, a data handling step, a initial chart sketching step, then a visualization step, and then a publishing step, which is, I guess, where the Canva side comes in. So that's kind of an interesting prospect. Whether they will go down that route or not, it remains to be seen, but it's certainly something that begins to start the possibility. But I also think there's something here about the when we talk about
before you
scalability,
go on,
jump
before
in.
you go on, Andy, just quickly, like the part in that branch that system that's not there yet is the data analysis piece.
Correct.
Right? Because Flourish is a data viz tool. You have to do your analysis and prep your data in some other tool. So once Canva buys whatever,
Lotus 1, 2, 3,
whatever they buy, ChatGPT, whatever it is, I mean, they, an easy way to think about it, right, would be some sort of AI built analytics tool, right? So they're not really building something from scratch. But once they build that, then you sort of close the loop a little bit, because right now it's missing a huge, and honestly, I'm not even sure that that's the right.
I still think you need the human element, but at least doing some of the legwork or some of the tedious cleaning, at least from our standpoint, like the powerful thing, and actually, Andy, we're working in this current flow because the beautiful thing about Canva having bought Affinity and also being connected to Flourish and Canva is that Canva has this policy that if you are a nonprofit, then you can have a license to the Affinity Design Suite, also to some degree Flourish, and also Canva for free. So because a lot of these tools are actually cost prohibitive. So whether you get the educational license or you get the nonprofit license, you're then able to, as an organization, have these tools to be able to actually communicate and publish the data and stories, and even I have to check for security reasons whether or not we can share this project in the episode notes. But we recently did that with an organization where we did the data collection in Canva, and then we actually had to rebuild their entire website, reproduce some things in Flourish, and then assembled it all there and published it through a Canva website. Which for a organization that has limited resources, time, and budget to be able to do stuff, no dev, but still have a design quality that's actually quite high to be able to shape something is pretty incredible. And then
it is, I mean, and again, I think by an extension of that, then, and going back to the kind of anecdote of Adobe Illustrator versus Affinity Designer and Adobe Suite full stop. My nephew, 17-year-old nephew, he's doing sort of digital art at his level of education, and I was suggesting to him that he could, out of his pocket money, get Affinity, and he could own it forever. It's a one-off payment. You've got it. It's there. And even if it's not the same as AI, you're still working with things like layers and alignment and different kind of common language features. But he was so single-minded that the conversations around careers advice, which is where he's looking at next, and university, needs you on your CV to have AI skills. It's a bullet point you need on your LinkedIn profile or a CV. So he was more minded to go that extra length to pay for an expensive tool like Illustrator because it was the career employability. And that's the other thing with a lot of this. You might have lots of reasonable issues with any given tool, but if that's the tool that your employment opportunities are going to be helped by getting skills with, it's another sort of sprinkling of weight on this side of the scale. So, I don't know what the concluding point here is, but it's messy, right? It's a complicated judgment call that one has to make about what to invest in. Think about 12 years ago, maybe now, people who invested in Flash skills. And then, although I'm sure that the overall mindset of how you use Flash is lift-upable and portable to other tools, it still was pretty much obsolete overnight. So it's also the future prospects of that tool's robustness and ongoing viability that is another mental investment for you to sort of juggle.
Well, but then there's always libraries within everything that's being used, right? So
exactly,
like we use React and now we use Svelte, and so there's always this incremental growth along this trajectory. And I think what you are talking about in many ways is this sort of gatekeeping of the tools themselves. I do think there's, we shouldn't be looking at this spectrum as very simply, you can have the data or collect the data, and then you can do the analysis. This is like just stop there. That's enough for some people. That's a whole field of having the data, collecting the data, and doing the analysis, right? I actually often will use Flourish, John, once I'm and I'm a strange bird because I have a right brain, left brain capability. So I have design capabilities, I have analysis capabilities, I have language, I have a strange brain, but sometimes I will just plug things into Flourish to break it and see what it shows me.
Yes.
And when I can visualize it. So I have I guess, I don't know if I'm back to your point at all, but I don't think that we are going to be able to build out a tool for every use case. I think we need to have choose tools, work with tools, master those tools, break those tools, add new tools to them, and continue to evolve. And I don't think you can build a tool that's going to capture everything. I just have to
No. Never.
And I think if it was attempted, I think it would fail.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know if we want.
We don't need that. No,
well,
it's too
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Sarah. You're like as closest to a unicorn as you can get, right? But like in general, I don't think you want. Yeah, you need a little. I don't think we want people like. I have a lot of designer friends who hate Canva, right? Because they're like, it's.
I love it.
I mean, I love it too, but
is that a corporate
I can
thing,
understand,
John?
but I can understand why you don't want to, because it's a skill, and you don't want to necessarily give a tool where people think they're suddenly a designer because they can, drop a few things in. Similarly, I'm not sure I want people to be able to run some sort of statistical analysis without
100%.
any data or statistical understanding of those things. I mean, these are
Precisely.
all parts of the system are skills. And so having a tool that tries to let anybody do all of it, I think is for probably
because the tool's not knowledge, right?
Right. No, the tool's not knowledge.
Yeah, but I think that's what gets confused a lot. To your point about Canva and design or statistical analysis, is that just because I still don't know what I'm doing or quote unquote what this actually means or is telling me.
Right.
And you come out on the wrong side. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think it goes back to the one of the early points about, what is a tool for? It's about the reproducibility. It's about doing things quicker than humans can do. It's about doing things that maybe are more efficient. And I think going back to one of your points, I think it was you, Michael, said about cleaning data. Actually, sometimes I want to do it by hand. I want to roll the sleeves up and get in there because I learn about the texture of the data.
Absolutely.
And actually, some of the issues of the data become the story, the gaps.
Exactly. And if you don't understand your data, if you start by not being able to understand your data, there's nothing you can do with it. If you don't understand what you're working with, who it came from, where it came from, what it's missing, what it has, there's no way you can plug it into any tool, any of these tools, and come up with garbage.
And it's why I've often actually, even though I've developed Tableau skills, I've often still done the data handling in Excel because I can see it.
Yeah.
I can see the result of calculations there. I know I can get to that in Tableau, but it's not front and center. It's behind and it kind of almost hidden to a degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we could go on for another 6 hours minimum, I reckon, but we can't.
If we had beers, I think.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. We might record it as well. But
can I ask one more?
We haven't quite finished yet, John. We're going to do.
We're not done.
We're going to do one more round of
all right,
questions.
good. So we are going for 6 more hours. Okay, good.
We're going to do 6 more minutes, maybe. But
Part two.
Coming on your point in a second, John.
Yeah,
but what I'd like to wrap up with, and again, maybe looking at helping people, and perhaps with our respective hats on, Michael, the hat of your world, and Sarah likewise, and John. If you were sort of recommending people to take a look at trying out 2 or 3 tools that are very important to you in your workflow or in your stack, what would those be? And again, John, if you want to come on to a different point, please do so as well. But Michael, go ahead. So what would be your go-tos?
I mean, my go-tos would definitely be Data Wrapper. because it's easy, intuitive. It brings you actually through a very structured pipeline of let's upload some data. Let's inspect that data, make sure it's all there and is okay. Let's visualize it. I can play around with it, and then let's export it or publish it. I would say if I'm getting into something a little bit more, I don't want to say serious, but something a little bit more large, where I want to play with some graph types that aren't there, I would say raw graphs, just because of the sensitive nature of some of the data that we go to, that the data sits client side. So when I clear that browser tab, I know my data's gone and I don't have to worry about any type of sensitivity from a security standpoint.
It's also a Milan-based tool, so you have to say that, don't you?
Yeah, I know. It was also developed by some people that are in our network, so it's.
But I completely agree. It's in my top 5, defo. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, also the new features that they've added are really great. And then I would say also, I was always in awe of the early days of Scriptographer, and when that went away, processing came around. But it came around at a point where I was actually, and still am, pretty lazy about learning programming software, but I understand how it works. So with either ChatGPT or Google's Gemini, I can generate the code that I think I want, plug it in, understand what that's happening, and then go back in and tweak it to be able to then get the result that I do want. So if I need to create something that's a bit more bespoke or interactive, so either processing with the help of AI and also React as well, I still love very much. But in terms of, I think that those would be, like, if I was starting out, definitely playing around with data wrapper, then maybe moving on to raw graphs. And then if you want to get in the deep end, either processing in AI, or there used to be this really cool tool that came out from this, I think, architecture school in Belgium called Nodebox, where I could drop in and connect little things and it would spit out some visualizations. It was super fun because you didn't have to code anything. You could drop in things like Legos, like I've got this variable, I wanted to do this visually, and then it would spit something out. It was super fun.
Scratch.
It seems to, I think it has echoes, and I can't remember now, but do you remember Quadrigram?
Oh, yeah.
No.
I think that had a similar kind of interface where you were sort of building it.
For sure.
Yeah.
It was more like Legos, basically. So taking even some of those core principles and just being like, okay, this is one column, and they're all built like that, really. So
Great. Sarah, thank you, Michael. Sarah?
Yeah.
So for my students, and this is a whole semester's worth, I teach them Excel to start with, because I want them to have that on their resume, to speaking to your nephew, right? And because I think you need to understand how to work with data, how data is structured, how to change data, what transpose means, and what a pivot table is. And once you've got that, then I show them Flourish, because with Flourish, you choose, because meanwhile, we've learned all the different charting languages. And then with Flourish, you can say, I want this tool. I want this viz. I want this, visualization. I want to.
And can I just jump in there as well, Sarah? Because one of the things that I like about Flourish, which speaks to your point about Excel as the starting point here, is it tells you the configuration of the data that you need to make this chart. And so it just gives you that, it joins the dots between your original data and, all right, so I need to have it long and thin. And so, sorry, go ahead. But yeah, I think that's a really nice feature that's quite subtle, but is an important part transformation-wise.
And then for folks that don't like to think that way and are less visual, I show them data wrapper. And there's always a section of class who prefer, like Michael, to plug the data, to say, okay, here's my data, let me plug it in. You make a choice for me, data wrapper. I used to also teach Illustrator. And so I was teaching them the class, that was a whole other piece, but it was just after COVID, it was too hectic. It was too much to smash into people's brains. But I start with understanding the data. I've done Google Sheets as well. We do alongside of Excel. We will do Sheets as well, just to understand that
Sheets is way better.
Have you ever seen the recommendations? Let me recommend a chart for you. Are you kidding me?
No, I don't use it for that.
Well, I know, but this is what I'm saying.
But yeah, no, I
Right.
know.
Rice ditto. Like, how should I? Anyway, so I just to broaden their horizon a little bit, we do sheets on the side, because if you can do Excel,
Hmm.
you can do sheets, right? But
Mm.
if you can do sheets, you can't do it. It doesn't go both
Yeah, that's a good point.
directions.
You know what's really cool about Sheets? Talking about hacking the box is that you can do serverless and CMS-less based design where you basically can do an entire code and use Sheets as your CMS, where you're just inputting content
Oh,
in
yeah.
there and then it's translating.
Mhm.
So, again, using scalability and
Right,
replicability. Yeah,
absolutely. It
can't do that with
absolutely.
Excel. Put that in your
Yeah.
book, John. Sorry,
Yeah,
Sarah.
yeah, yeah.
New
He
addendum is
hasn't
coming
published a
out.
book
I'm gonna
for a
write
few
an
weeks, has
errata.
he? Yeah.
It's called
I'm
Brenner
good.
errata.
Thank you, Sarah. John, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, area specific. So I would add, I mean, to the research world, I would add R. Like that's like if someone were coming, going into grad school or a data analyst, I guess, whatever, what tool would they use? It would be R. I don't think I can code R on the graphics package, but basically nothing else, right? So my workflow is pretty janky, right? Like I will do the data inputting, cleaning, analysis in Stata. I don't use SAS anymore, pretty much in Stata. And then to do the graphics part, I'm either piping it over to R or into Excel, which is admittedly not the ideal would just be do it all in R. And then we use Data Wrapper on the Urban blog. I actually think I've started to prefer Flourish a little bit, only primarily because there's just a wider array of options in there. But they all have some weirdnesses to them. The other thing I would say is Flourish recently came out with an R package and a Python package. And the issue at the moment is that it's unclear how to get your Flourish graph built in R out of RStudio. Like, what do you do with it, right?
Yeah.
But if you're using Cordo, then you can pull everything together. Michael, you sort of said like building like a website out of Canva. You could do something similar in R because you could build a Cordo markdown and then pop your Flourish graph right into there. Of course, now you need to code, right? And so like not everybody needs to do that. But if you are doing your PhD in economics, like, you're doing pretty heavy data analysis. And so,
Yeah.
R is going to be the place that I would start. I mean, I used to be like, oh, I wish I could code in JavaScript. And then I tried and my brain doesn't work that way.
And I think
So-
I think on that note, John, and I'm likewise. I've dabbled with different coding languages and never sought or never successfully mastered any of them. But I think there's something that's kind of on my mind about that, which is like to your case example there, the code to do that can probably be found with a smart search. You may not need to learn the code to accomplish the task. You just got to find a way to find the solution in script. I did a bit of chat GPT in last year to get some Python script to do something. I've never used Python before. The first thing was how to install Python. But I got the solution in the end, and I'm none the wiser about Python as a result of it, but I've done the thing that the Python script did.
Yeah.
So I think that there's just whatever works. A bit of foraging, bit of searching is an important
Absolutely.
skill.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that's to Michael's point from earlier about the you build the Comet piece and you want to take chunks out of it and use it for other projects. If you don't understand the kind of philosophy
building
behind
blocks,
the Python or the syntax, then you can't do that thing. But
Sure.
I'm with you, Andy. Like I use ChatGPT for like little VBA things in Excel, because you can have like I don't know, a code is a human expression, but if you're trying to do something pretty straightforward, right? You want to make all of your bars in your bar chart a certain width, like whatever. You just need to know the syntax.
There's an objective right and wrong that's there.
Exactly. So like, who cares if for me, when it comes to coding in particular, I think of ChatGPT as Google on steroids.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because instead of looking for 500 different sites,
but also you can prompt it in a way that just gives you, exactly. It gives you what you're a realm of what you're looking for. And if it doesn't work the first time, then you're like, hey, this didn't work. I'm trying to achieve this, because it's never going to get it the first time. So it's always just reprompting it. And then eventually it kind of understands what you're trying to do with it.
Yeah. Right. But it would be hard to give ChatGPT a bunch of, say, VBA prompts and then say, I'm a VBA programmer. Right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think
it doesn't replace it. It becomes a powerful Ask Jeeves.
Yeah. Ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves. It becomes a powerful Ask Jeeves. Now we're really dating things.
Right.
But,
absolutely.
You know, because if you're curious, and if you are, let's say, lack of a better word, a lifelong learner, then when you're presented with all of this landscape of things, then you're willing to kind of link things up and explore what's out there. And back to Sarah's point too, like, to the whole conversation point, there's no one tool for anything specific. And if you don't start with the data and start with the content first, then it's just for naught.
Well, that's it. I mean, and I think sort of a few closing points. I mean, the other tool that we haven't mentioned, and I maybe briefly did, it pen and paper.
Yeah.
Because so much of it in my workflow is just jotting ideas down. It's sketches, just getting things out of your head, and I think with that though is a recognition that fluency in a tool is unique to all of us. So if someone finds sketching more fluent to achieve in JavaScript, just use JavaScript. Don't force yourself into a pen and paper person if that's not you. Use whatever gives you that seamless lack of friction from there to there. Just use it. But I do a lot of sketching, and I like that process because it gives me a way to start the process. The other thing is, obviously, over the last few years, we've seen quite I don't know if an explosion is perhaps hyperbole, but you know, a lot of work is out there that's kind of artisanal, that's kind of hand-drawn, that's sketching. Perhaps the work of Georgia Lupi and Steph Posavec have kind of popularized that kind of maybe entry point for many people to get into data viz. So don't rule out the handcrafts as a way to create some work just to get into the subject. But I think the other broader point, which is perhaps a summary point as well, is in the absence of data viz having any sense of the perfect solution. There isn't the perfect data viz.
No.
It's all trade-offs and compromises. I think one of the themes that's jumped out for me is the need to just be innovative, because innovation comes from dealing with constraints and finding ways around, whether that's hacking a tool to get more out of it, which loads of people do with Tableau, with Excel, or whether it's hacking together a series of different tools that you wouldn't ever imagine work together to get to an end product. It's just whatever does the job. And then I think perhaps a key closing point to Sarah's repeated point, which is, well, what is it you're trying to do? What is the message? What's the story? What's the purpose of this? Because that will ultimately dictate what's the right tool for the job you're doing. So we could have gone for another 3 hours. We won't, for the benefit of listeners and viewers. But thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John, for an enriching hour and 15. I think it's been. It's flown by. There's loads of things we've not covered. I will drop into the show notes lots of links to various things. There'll be some cheap plugs to resources on my website. I won't deny that. But it's been a pleasure to speak to you all, and thank you to everyone out there for watching and listening, and see you on another episode very soon. Bye for now. To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualizingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. See you next time.